All right, y'all, so let's talk about this. There's something I thought about a long time ago, and I just finally decided to make a video about it. I actually was going to make a video about this a long time ago, and I didn't. But, you saw the thumbnail. Excuse me. I still watch Martin to this day. That's one of the, shows that I liked. Sanford and Son, the Jeffersons, all that shit. So, this is what I was thinking. Now, I'm going to give you my thoughts then, not now, because so much time has went by. So I don't want to give you any thoughts about anything that they could have did. This is my initial thought. Okay, so Martin did, 5 seasons? And as you know, Martin Lawrence and Tisha Campbell had a situation. So that pretty much got to the point where, the show just ended up being canceled. Now, excuse me. When the show came to an end, in that very last episode where basically Martin and Gina relocated because they both found work out in the West Coast or something like that, out in LA. So now you got Tommy, Cole, and Pam that's still in Detroit. And so, of course, it's just a show. But, people do use their imagination like, damn, just imagine. So now Martin and Gina are no longer there. All right. So, to keep the show going, and what I thought about was because this. When I saw the episode where, like, if you notice, because Martin and Gina's character, they wasn't around each other. They would be on the phone or something like that. But, so, I remember the episode where Pam was trying to get this job at some record label or something like that. And I felt like they were trying to create a spinoff show for Pam. Because I saw the same thing happen with Sanford and Son. Where Sanford and Son end up becoming just Sanford. Lamont was gone. Julio was gone. Rollo was still there. It was Rollo. Then they had the big fat white guy named Cal. And I think they did 2 seasons of that. And the thing was, Fred was just as even funnier. The only difference was he didn't have Esther to crack on too much. They were on like a couple of episodes. So Bubba, Melvin, Grady, the cops that, the people that normally was around, you saw less and less of them. Now, the same thing. Grady had a spinoff show off of Sanford and Son. Take Three's Company, John Ritter. He had, I think they called, was it called Three's a Crowd or something like that or whatever it was, but they had a spinoff show of that. Now, the thing is, every show don't come to an end because it's not doing good. The ratings are still good. A lot of times it's contract disputes. If you remember, there's times where Fred wasn't on, where he wasn't on, certain episodes of Sanford and Son, and like Grady would fill in, and yeah, it was contract disputes. Same thing. It's times where you didn't see Lamont on the show, or you didn't see, look at Good Times, where you didn't see Esther roll. They wrote James' character off as he died because he left the show, and basically, they knew he wasn't going to ever return. So you see this. So the show don't always come to an end because it's doing bad. It's just like, let's end this on a high note because people don't see how they're going to keep it going. But you had a lot of spinoffs, shows that there was. I'm not talking about somebody who just go get a show because, as you know, Damon Wilson went on. He did a show called Baby I'm Back. Then he did the new Odd Couple with Ron Glass. So that's something different. But I'm talking about like a character that comes from a particular show. Same thing with the Jeffersons. You saw Lionel, you saw Louise, you saw George on episodes of All in the Family. Then they had a spinoff, The Jeffersons. So that type of thing. That's what I'm talking about. All right. And I feel like that's what they were trying to do with Pam. Now, later on, years later, we found out, yeah, that's exactly what they were trying to do. I don't know how well that would have done. Because you got to look at what this show was. Martin's show just felt more organic the way it was, as opposed to what they'd have been doing with Pam, because this is not a best friend issue. This is about just her working at some record company. Okay, at some point, she's going to find a new boyfriend. You're not going to see Martin. You're not going to see Cole. You're not going to see Tommy. Or, you understand what I'm saying? Not going to see, maybe you might see Tisha Campbell, but like, how? How? Are they both in the same area? You know, and it just wouldn't have felt the same to try to have, you can't have a spinoff of Martin with not, and don't have the main characters where they're the life of the show. And they're bringing all these new other different people into where it's like they're all over the place. And it's not that it doesn't have that organic feel. It just has that, you know, like, okay, they're trying to make it as funny as they did Martin, but, you know, and you know, Pam was funny, and all those other shows. Like, example, I think the Jeffersons did like 9 or 10 seasons or something like that. Married with Children, same thing, like, because they kept the funny, they kept it funny. You know, Sanford and Son did 6 seasons, and then they had the Sanford spinoff. So I think that was 2 seasons of that. So even though it's a spinoff, you got to look at it like 8 seasons. You look at the same with What's Happening. They did 3, then they did What's Happening Now. I think they did 2 seasons of that, so that's 5 altogether. With, you know, different people weren't on there. You know, the mother was gone. The guy that played the father, he was no longer on there. So there was a lot of differences. But my thought was this, and I said, I wonder how many seasons Martin would have did if they would have kept the same cast. And of course they have to have their own creativity. Now this is just what my thought was. Okay, ain't no guarantee, but if they would have just been creative and kept it going this way, this is what I thought. You guys know who Lark Voorhies is, right? So she was famous from Saved by the Bells. That's what she got known from. And I remember they had an episode. Now think about this. So in real life, Martin and Gina bump heads. They're no longer on the show. Before I even say that, think about this. Look at the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. They had Aunt Vivian, right? Went from the original dark-skinned aunt to the light-skinned chick. There was no, okay, because this is Uncle Phil's wife. So, damn, what do we do now? We don't have an episode of them breaking up or something. And, you know, now we got to, you know, switch up everything. So they just replaced her like nothing ever happened, right? Okay, just somebody else playing the same person. The same thing on the Jeffersons. If you remember, the original Lionel had the afro. Then they had the dark-skinned guy that came in, had the shorter hair. He just replaced Lionel. He was the new Lionel. But then later on, the old Lionel, the original Lionel, came back. That happens. You've seen people swap roles. All right, Tisha Campbell, Martin, and all of them were like major players, but the focus of the show overall was Martin and Gina. Okay. So this is what happened, what my thoughts was. Because if you remember the episodes where Martin and Gina broke up, now when she bought the statue of the ass, and she came home and came over there with Pam and Martin and Tommy and Cole was in there playing around with the statue. They got into this big thing and they wound up breaking up. Now, if you remember, in that show, he met Lark Voorhies. You know, they forced him out to go to the club and all that. And he met Lark and they connected and whatever. They started dating for a little bit. Now, Gina, on the other hand, is dating this guy, Michael, who played Braxton on the Jamie Foxx show. So I'm thinking like, okay, so it's Martin's show. You know Martin's not going to go anywhere. So let's say Tisha Campbell's out the picture. This is what I think they could have did, right? This is my original thought. Now, you could have put a lot of people, I mean, to play his girlfriend or whatever. Lisa Ray was one of the names, because Lisa Ray was actually on the episode. A lot of people don't even know that. When I tell people, yeah, Lisa Ray was on the episode, they like, nah, what the fuck, you think I'm on drugs, man? And then I go show, and they're like, oh, shit, I didn't even recognize that. If y'all don't know, it was the episode when the guy that played Cochise on Cooley High, remember his wife? They were swingers, and they got Martin and them to come over to this swingers party, but Martin didn't know it was a swingers party. Martin and Tommy went. In this episode, Gina stayed home. She had a headache or something like that, so Martin went without her, right? And if you remember, the chick that jumped on Tommy's back, and Tommy's like, I'm about to get my freak on, right? That was Lisa Ray. People look at it and go, oh, shit, you're right. Yeah, I know, motherfucker. It's kind of like one of those moments where you watch Coming to America, and then years later people going, wait, that's Cuba Gooding Jr. sitting in that barber chair? Yeah, it always was Cuba Gooding Jr. But yeah, it's one of those things. She didn't have any real dialogue, nothing. All she did was walk across. I remember she grabbed somebody's hand or something, looked and walked on it. So she was like in the background. But she was the one that jumped on Tommy's back. Now, even Vivica Fox was on there. Now, I didn't think of Vivica Fox. I did think of Lisa Ray for a split second because she was on the show. And I was like, And there's other people anybody we can think of. But my pick was Lark Voorhies for this reason. They were dating, right? And if you remember, it was like the whole time Martin kept thinking about Gina. You remember he was move over Gina or whatever, Gina this and that. And she jumped up. I don't know, Martin, maybe I can ask her. So basically he still got feelings for Gina. All right, now they end up getting back together in the show, of course. But Lark told him, I know I told you I've fallen in love with you, but I don't love you, and this, that, and she went back to her boyfriend. So that was the first and only time she was on there. Now, I just thought, what if they would have did this? Okay, no more Tisha Campbell. She's off the show. But you still got Martin. You still got Tommy, Cole, and Pam. Now, Martin, of course, is still going to do the characters. Shanae, Otis, or whatever, different characters he played. Was the white guy Bob he played. Different things like that. King Beef, he had a lot of funny shit that they could have still did. But this is what I thought. They could have did this instead. They have an episode where Martin and Gina both end up hooking things up where they got to go out to the West Coast. Now, this is what happens. When they pick back up with Martin to do the reboot, they make it like it's 5 years later. And they do an episode where the first episode, of course, would be basically, let's say they still got Nipsey's. So they're at Nipsey's and they're just thinking about the old times and talking. Now, they could have did a couple of things. When you start bringing a whole lot of new faces in, you gotta do it right. Because again, it just doesn't feel organic anymore. They could have made it where Pam and Tommy finally just tied a knot. Now, they're getting older, but they're still young. They tied a knot. Cole was with Shanice, remember? 2 airheads. They could have did it where they're sitting in Nipsey's, and let's just say, for example, they might not have talked to Martin in a long time, but they are aware that Martin and Gina split up. But they have no idea that Martin's in town. So let's say it's the type of thing, they are at Nipsey's or whatever, and Martin's in town. He want to surprise him, and he walks in. Now imagine how that crowd would have reacted. If Martin come in, he reunites with all of them. Now I think that would be better than just him telling them, well, like he haven't been in touch with them all this time. All of a sudden, and me and Gina didn't work, but they know, so they're aware that they didn't work out. But Martin comes back and they're talking and everything, and of course there's some more maturity there because they're a little older now. But at the same time, what they maybe could have did different is maybe Pam and Martin is not beefing like they used to be. They might still crack on each other and have these little moments and all that, but because really it was like Pam really didn't like Martin. You understand what I'm saying? They didn't like each other. That could have changed where, they're no longer beefing. Okay. It could have been a thing where Martin and Lark Voorhies end up running into each other, and they just kind of rekindle things and start dating again. And hey, you know what? Hey, last time, this and that, and just the timing wasn't right, but I'm single now, she's single, and okay, guess what? Now Martin and Lark Voorhies is, whatever changes needed that they could have didn't have to be anything drastic, but you got to keep the show funny. And remember, this is one of the shows where you had a live audience. The next phase after Martin, honestly, was dramas, but they're labeled as comedies. Like, there's a show called The Game, and I just couldn't get into it, man, because they had it labeled as a comedy, and I'm watching it. I'm not laughing. The jokes aren't funny. That laughing machine nonsense and all, it's just not, the feeling is not there anymore, So shows like the Jamie Foxx show, the Wayans Brothers, those shows were silly and funny. Three's Company, silly and funny. So even when you have situations where, okay, they might have a serious topic that they address here and there, you don't want to fucking like get to the point, man, where you're just taking the fun out the show. Rock was one of my shows. I used to love watching Rock, especially that like it got real intense when, what was my man name? I forgot the character he played, but my man that was you know, the pimp that was on Dead Presidents. Don't you ever bite the hand that feeds you, nigga. You know what I'm saying? The one that turned on old what's his name? Kane and Menace to Society, and turned that tape to the police. Y'all know what I'm talking about. I forget his damn name. But like when he came in the Rock in them neighborhoods selling drugs and everything, and Rock was trying to get rid of him, that was a real intense time. Now, the show was a comedy. What they were able to pull off was, it was interesting. You know, and I don't feel like every comedy need to do that. So like when I want to laugh, I want to laugh. And that's one of the things that like shows like Married with Children kept. You know, like I said, Three's Company, Sanford, and so they kept the funny shit there. They kept it funny. And like I said, if you look and watch Sanford, when it was just Sanford, man, it's like he was even funnier. You know, and of course he went on to the Royal Family, which had nothing to do with Sanford, his son, but you know, he passed away on the set. But like, yeah, he got funnier. So he's considerably older than all of them. So they could have kept it funny. Now, if they would have went into that phase of making it a drama, it wouldn't have been the same at all. But if they would have kept it funny, man, now you still got the main cast there, with the exception of, you know, Tisha Campbell. And of course, type of thing could happen where, you know, Pam actually gets close with Lark Voorhies' character, and then it ends up being a thing where they, you know, get real close as well. And therefore, you know, Pam has a reason to be around more on the show. Tommy as well, because they're all friends. And they could even, you know, of course, it'd have been different things. They might show episodes where somewhere they go to Cole's apartment, or Tommy and, you know, Pam's apartment or whatever. But, you know, they could have kept it funny. They could have really did that. Now, of course, now this is just my thoughts, but they could have did that and kept it funny. And I just felt like Lark Voorhies would have been perfect for that fill-in, because, you know, as a replacement, not a fill-in, a replacement, because, like I said, she come from a sitcom background too, so she already know, like she just had a look about herself, and like even how well her and Martin blended when they was on the show. You know, I said, damn, that would have been a good replacement, damn good replacement, and I think the show would have been just as potent. You know, yeah, I think without Tisha Campbell, certain characters you can replace. I think Tisha would have been missed because she was a vital part of the show. You know, but I don't feel like with her not being on the show that the show wouldn't have been as funny. You know, she, you know, I think the show would have, I think they could have, I was put it to you like this. Excuse me. I say they could have got at least 2 more seasons out, at least. And I say that because if there was no real fatigue there, where, you know, they like the show is not wearing them out, or, you know, if it's a pleasant vibe, you know, amongst the cast, you know, everybody understands like what they're doing, and, you know, I say they could have got at least 2 episodes, 2 more seasons, not episodes, 2 more seasons at least. You know, I think they could have, shit, they might even better get 3, but I say at least 2, excuse me. But that was my thought, because that was a sad episode when you watch it, and then they leave and Martin walk over there, look around his big ass empty apartment, and he took the marker and just wrote Martin or Love Martin or something like that on the wall. They paused, looked, and closed the door, like, damn, you know, like the shit had to happen, man. They had to just, right? That was a very funny show, man. It was an impactful show. And that's the thing. Comedy is supposed to make you laugh. I shouldn't, you know, like I said, Rock was able to pull it off with that because it got real intense. And I get it, and I understand that. Because the drug dealing in the neighborhoods, I lived in a neighborhood that was drug infested as well, so I understood, I could relate to it. But that's not what I mean. I mean, when it comes to comedies, and they're like dramas, the majority of the show is not about comedy. It's not funny at all. They'll make a crack here and there, but everybody in them, it's always like a struggle. It's always something where the show is more serious. That's labeled a drama, which would make it easier for you to know what to pick and choose. Because if you're looking for a comedy and you go and get a show like this, this is not funny. You know what I mean? It's not funny. I'm not laughing. Excuse me. And Martin was a funny show. So I always had thought about that. And I just thought about it more recent last night, actually, because I sitting there watching Martin, and I'm laughing because I'm like, damn, when you start to get older and they want to start to put some maturity in the characters and things like that, you can do that, but tread light. If you think about it, look at Mr. Brown. Look at what was the other one? Meet the Browns, and then what was the other show with the husband and the wife? The chubby guy was always cracking jokes. I forget the name of the show. But it was at the same time as Meet the Browns. And look, these are people in their 50s and up. See, you understand what I'm saying? So they could have kept Martin a very, very funny show. I think that still Martin ratings were still good when the show got canceled. So that was my thoughts at the time when I first really sat and thought about it, because I had bought the DVD set. And I was sitting there watching it like, damn, this is a funny show, man. They could have kept this going. But I think that Lark Voorhies would have been, I think that would have been the perfect replacement. And not to mention the fact that even though it was only one episode, but it could have developed to where, excuse me, now she's a regular. She's Martin's girlfriend on the show, white or whatever. and hey, man, listen. Eventually they got married. They didn't know how, but bottom line, and also keep the show with the same camera with everything. I don't like that camera that they like shows like The Game or like Happy Days and shit and stuff, like shows like that. I don't like that camera personally. For sitcoms, I like the camera they have for Martin, the Jeffersons, and like Sanford. I don't like when they have that cinematic like movie like style of. It just don't feel the same. The Brady Bunch had that shit too. Like. It just don't feel the same, and if they present a show to you a certain way, those little changes do make a difference where, if the show is funny, it's funny, but I think that they could have did that, man. And that's one of the shows that you found yourself from time to time thinking like, damn, what could they did to save this show? But that was my initial thought of replacing Tisha Campbell with Lark Voorhies and, making her a regular. And I say like, probably two more seasons, because now if you start going into, now we got kids and now we got if the ball continue to roll, cool. But I know when it comes to like sitcoms, most sitcoms don't go past 6 or 7 seasons. You look at how many sitcoms there's been, and you look at most of them did 2-3 seasons the most, and you realize like, damn, yeah, that's true. Things change, but I feel like they could have used those pieces to just keep things tight. And therefore, if you do it the way I said it, you don't have to sit here and spend 5 or 6 episodes trying to explain what happened between Martin and Gina. And basically, Martin would have just like, we went through some tough times. Like, we got out there, things wasn't as easy as we thought it would be. We thought we had it together, and things just fell apart, man. And we both just decided that it's best that we just separate. But my life is not in L.A. I had to come back home to Detroit. You understand what I'm saying? There's something to that effect. And yeah, now they're all back together again. Otherwise, if you stay in L.A., what's going to happen? Tommy, Cole, and Pam going to end up going to L.A. just because Martin and them out there. So Martin would have had a reason to come back because that's where he's from, and he just missed being back in Detroit or whatever. And I mean, I got so many damn ideas of what they could have did, but that's for any show that you really like when it ended. But it's just the way Martin ended, the reason it ended. You know what I mean? I remember the episode where, like, what's the lady name? The one that played in the movie with Martin, The Thin Line Between Love and Hate. I remember when they went on that boat and they pretended that Gina was on the wrong boat because they was going through that time. So she had Martin handcuffed up in the room and all that. And, those episodes, they still had, like, funny episodes, but Martin's energy was different. If you notice, and it was probably the wear and tear from what was actually happening, but his energy wasn't the same. He was more subtle, more laid back. It just wasn't the same Martin. And I feel like it was because of what was happening, whatever pressure was on him at the time too. Yeah, so I think that without Tisha Campbell being there and the show continuing and the ratings were still good at the time, that would have been the boost that he probably needed to like really get back to, all right, let me be Martin again. Let me because like when you look at Tommy, you look at Cole and Pam, they were still the same, but you can see a difference in Martin. Even Tisha Campbell, her she was acting the same. It's just that, excuse me, they were separated, and her roles would be like very limited. You know what I'm saying? And I think that, they'd be like, you know what? All right, let's continue. Let's work. And I say they could have got like 2 more seasons out of Martin, 2 more good seasons on top of that. Then if it would have came to an end, it would have, when you like something, you wanted to just go on and on. But but at the end of the day, yeah, I feel like that would have been all the way up until, because now when you have a baby, every episode will have to be you tending to a baby one way or another. You're going to have episodes you just toss your baby off to be watched by somebody. Like, now it's a whole different thing. Now you got to start rewriting their life in a way. You got a kid now. You know what I mean? So it's like, before it get to that point, you know what? Or they didn't have to do that. It could have just been a thing like where, just take your time. That we done been through this, or what I'm saying. Bottom line, and they can come on any excuse for them to not have a baby, or they could just stay away from it. Either way, you know what I'm saying. But I think that would have been a great replacement for Tisha Campbell. And yeah, I think they still could have, made some fun episodes, and I think Martin would have got his mojo back, because like I said, Martin's character was like so much more laid back. The funniest episode to me that I can remember, when Tisha Campbell was pretty much like, when that situation was going on, was when they come to find out on the divorce, the marriage license, that Pam signed what Gina was supposed to have signed, and Gina signed what Pam was supposed to have signed. So all this time that Martin was married to Gina. See, that silly shit. That's what and they wind up going to back to where they got married, or something to that effect. And it happened to be Pam's cousin, Leon Lonnie Love, was the one there, and all of that. And like stuff that was probably like the most memorable one. Just offhand, I got the shit at home anyway, and it's all over Netflix. They got the full collection on Netflix anyway. But yeah, I thought about that, man. I said, damn, they could have kept Martin going. Like, they really could have kept Martin going. And that was the thoughts that I had initially, not years later. Not, just right then and there. Well, it was years later, actually, because what happened was this with me with Martin. At the time when Martin was like, still in syndication, I would watch it, but I was busy, doing my thing. Like, I don't stop what I'm doing just to watch a show or whatever. They out there making their money and living. I got to do the same thing. So that's leisure time shit. That's just, But yeah, I would catch the show and stuff, and I would watch it. So I was aware of what was going on. But when the show was no longer in syndication, and then the DVD set came out, that's when I was able to just, whenever I wanted, just pop a DVD in at the time or whatever and shit like that. So I had the complete set. And like I said, I watch Martin now, and it's funny, man, when I sit there and look at, like, damn, man, it's like everything you was watching at one point, stuff you grew up on, you're like, damn, how the time just bam, bam, gone. Damn. So yeah, that was my thoughts. That was my thoughts on it. I thought they could have really kept that show going. I think Lark Voorhies would have been, yeah, I think she would have did her thing too. And it's all about the writing and the role that what can we do to, make her funny and not make her act like Gina. You're not trying to make her do anything like Gina. You just want her to be funny. And I think that they could have did it. And I think that the show would have been just as successful, man. And shit, they might have wound up doing more. They might have pulled the Jeffersons or fucking Married with Children, wound up doing 9 to 11 fucking seasons. I'm just saying, it depends on if they're willing to keep it going. But I definitely say they could have got at least 2 more in, and we'd be sitting here now talking about those 2 seasons and had more of Martin to see. But that's just my thoughts on it anyway. We don't cry with spilled milk. But anyway, just wanted to share that with y'all. What y'all think? Talk to me. That's all I got for y'all now. Catch y'all on the next video.